First of all, it's a bit of a warning. I'm in a little bit of a manic mood at the moment. So it's tough. Tough for you, not me. But that's okay. I'll get serious soon. Welcome. And hello from the mob in Sydney. Yeah. I was going to ask them to stand in front of the camera and say hellos, but I forgot. I'm sorry. Lisa is with us. Lisa. Jenny is with us, of course. Yeah. And Zara. Yeah. So we've got some interest. Well, I think it's interesting. I don't know what you'll think about it. I'll ask you at the end whether you found it interesting. I've got some things planned to do over the next 2 weeks that have a very specific purpose to them. And see, I've lost my manicness. There you go. It's bordering. Yeah. And I've laid them out this way because it's a way into FI practice that is not demonstration based. I was sitting and reflecting on, what will I give you? What will I share with you in the next 2 weeks? And it came to my mind that there's a kind of discontinuity between your first 2 years and your second 2 years, reflecting on all the trainings I've visited over the years. And the discontinuity is this. In the first 2 years, when you're doing all that awareness through movement, there isn't a visual model. You're not copying anybody. And then all of a sudden, the FI starts, and what are you doing? Copying somebody. I'm thinking, yeah, there's got to be another way. Not that copying someone is not necessarily a good thing, but there seems to be some sort of crossover that's missing. So I'm investigating what can that crossover be, what can it look like, and how can I present it to you in a way that is beneficial to you and enables us to get clearer of how to construct this process. So as we go through this material over the next 2 weeks, please know that I am much in the process with you of investigating and using this material as you are with it. Okay, and I will make adjustments. I can't help myself. I always make adjustments to what we do. Okay, so that's like the overview. Here's the material that we'll be going through. So first of all, to further clarify this relationship between awareness through movement and this practice that we call functional integration. And we'll be crossing over between one and the other and the other and the other, hopefully revealing some assumptions and getting clearer how we can use the two. Second, and this is probably, no, that doesn't need that comment. Second, crafting an FI environment. I mean, everything happens in a context. Can't get away from it. So it's useful to acknowledge what context is the functional integration lesson happening in, and how can that context be crafted into the scenario so that it's not just, I do lessons on a table, and I do lessons on a table, and I do lessons on a table, because you haven't just realized that the table is already a context. Yeah, it's an assumed context. How can you use that table? Ooh, have I got some things for you? Yeah, a table is not just a table to lie on. And this is the improv from Sydney, right? They didn't get it, but you will. But they'll see it. So how do we craft that? And by the way, you're part of that context. how you are, who you are, and what you say makes a big difference. We'll be using a couple of my case studies so that you can see what someone has written in regards to an FI that they gave with a specific person, so you can see the specific context, the specific FI, and then we'll deconstruct the FI into an ATM, and then we'll reconstruct it back into an FI, and in one case we'll then deconstruct it into an ATM again. So we'll go backwards and forwards with the case studies. Fourth one, it's to identify, to help you identify what it is that you're bringing to the functional integration context, what skills, what knowledge, what you're bringing. Because the more aware of it is what you're bringing and what's of importance, better it is for you. Better it is for you, better it is for your client. Yeah. And the last one, I'm doing what do you call it? Like retro music? What's it called, Lisa? Retro? Doing a retro. I'm doing retro. Retro. Now, it used to be that all functional integration lessons were given inside class hours. Yeah, that used to be the norm. And then somehow they kind of went outside class hours. And I think something's been lost. So I'm bringing it back. Why? Not for you to make it compulsory for you to watch them. Because when we watched them, I don't know about you, it was like, you know, you didn't do that as much. When we watched them, when Susan and I watched them, there was no commentary given. They were just sat and watched. And then you had to make up stories in your mind about what might be happening. And, you know, there's only so many stories you can make up over a 4-year period. They get richer and more diverse, but the intent is to give you an opportunity to ask your questions about what's happening in the FI at that time. So questions about what are you thinking, what are you planning, why did you do that and not that, those kinds of questions. Okay, yeah. People started to warm up to it in Sydney, and it does take some warming up. So that's the last thing on the list. So that's the kind of lay of the land over the next 2 weeks. And there's only one more thing to do, and that is to let you know, to give you a sort of a personal anthropological declaration here. The way I think about FI is the way I think about FI. Please know that that's what you're getting. You're not getting Lisa's way or Jenny's way. Hopefully in the class FIs, you will get Lisa's way and Jenny's way. But primarily, the model that I'll be presenting to you is the way that Zoran kind of thinks about functional integration. It's not the way, it's a way. It's proven useful for me. And that way of giving functional integration has a history. It's born out of something. And it's born out of actually not giving what you'd call, quote, unquote, traditional, conventional functional integration lessons. When I first graduated, I stayed away from FI for a long, long time. But it gradually found its way into my teaching at university with the dancers and the theatre performers and so on. And it found its way in there, incidentally, when the talking didn't quite work I used talking and hands-on, and my FIs were like 3-5-minute grabs to try to get across some notion that, if Lisa was asking me something about her practice as a dancer, and for me to convey to her an answer, I would do this thing called functional integration. And they go, oh, okay, I get that. So that's where my practice was born out of. And it's also born out of a scenario where I was not working with injured or sick people. So that was never on my mind. Should I tell you the next part? Yeah, I'll tell you the next part. Now, believe it or not, in my own naivety, or is it naivete? Naivety? No. I thought I wasn't doing functional integration. I thought I was doing some crazy business that was, Zoran Kovic's little funny deal off to the side. Until one day, and you might remember, they sent around this certificate saying, it was the IFF. We believe you are a successful Feldenkrais teacher. And they were doing a survey of what it is to be a successful Feldenkrais teacher. And I got this, I went, no, I'm not. I'm not a success. I don't have a practice. I don't have a shingle. I don't have any of that. I'm not successful. What do you mean I'm successful? And it turns out I was sort of successful in someone else's eyes, but not in mine. So I was carrying with me this baggage called a big assumption about what functional integration is and the practice of functional integration. And then that started to lift off my eyes. It's like, oh, wait a minute, maybe I am doing functional integration. Maybe I am doing a practice. And the lid, the veils went completely off when I did actually try to set up a private practice, and I started to work with not so well people. And I quickly found out that that was not the domain I was interested in. Full stop. Instead of being active, enthusiastic, creative, I went to kind of like dull, too overly empathetic, and mildly depressed. Totally, yeah. So I then made choices. So know that most of my FIs come out of not that domain of working with people who are in trouble, and more in the domain of, how does Feldenkrais put it, perfecting. Yeah, helping individuals perfect a little bit more who are already able. Yeah. So as long as you know that, that's good. I've declared my biases here. Yeah. Now, I've got a process that I'd like you to start with, so that we know what else to do and what else interests you. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Could you get into groups of 4? And then once you're in your group of 4, could you please discuss, identify these burning questions? What do you most want to ask about the practice of FI? Yeah. Do we have paper? We don't have paper? Good. Well, at least we've got a second whiteboard, and we've got that whiteboard. Yeah? Take your time. And no, it could be 1, 2, 3, 4, but definitely not 5. 4 only. No, just joking. Yeah. Yeah. So do that, and then we'll bring the questions into the group, larger group, and see what those are. let's hear one group at a time what your burning questions are that if you didn't find out you would dissolve in 2000 degrees centigrade. Who's on first? So, should there be repetition? Let there be repetition. Please don't edit. Yeah, just lay out the questions. Yep. I'm not turned on. No, I turned it off to save batteries. Sorry.
Yep, that's better. Cool. So everyone will chip in because I may not represent it properly. But one thing we started off is how to create an effective learning environment in an FI, particularly the balance between talking and sensing. So, you know, on the one hand, the ATM we direct via our voice. In my experience of FIs, they've been completely just sensory.
Mm-hmm.
Is that if, you know, how do you create, it seems such a strict dichotomy. Can you include some talking in the FI to improve the learning environment, but not to the extent of drowning out the sensory or the somatic experience?
Yeah.
So
Good.
What's the balance? And then also we came up about setting the scene for first timers, and obviously you need to do a little bit of talking because they won't have a clue about what you're going to do. And then how to connect with the person, but without doing it in an overly doing it, so that you do try and create that joint system, but not so much that you start feeling their pain or you lose yourself in it. How some ATMs are some ATMs always able to be translated to FI? So, for example, a lot of the eye and jaw ones, are they translatable to an FI situation? We wouldn't mind some more guidance. We're not too bad with moving legs, but we wouldn't mind some basic
How did you get here today?
More techniques on moving the core body bits the way you want.
Yeah. And
arms, yes. And then if a person comes with something specific, we know that, you know, where our goal is to provide an integrated response to that. But how do we, of all the myriad of ways you could approach it, how do we choose the integrated response that will be of some benefit to their specific bit?
Mm-hmm.
And then we talked about the stages of an FI. So that's a bit related to that. Where do you start and how do you progress? And then it was an interesting one that people have had some experience of people coming in with pain and then ringing up the next day or a few days later saying the pain is so much worse. You know, initially a good response, and those people haven't come back. And you know, the whole issue of pain and how people focus on it and how you can perhaps shift their awareness to the bits that aren't in pain. And it's because we know the more you focus on pain, the worse it is, sort of thing.
Suddenly I saw 1, 2, 3 pairs of eyes going, whoa. I know about pain. Sorry. That's great. That's great. Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. As I said, you know, you do this task and you start digging for what is FI and what is FI and what is FI, and after a while you find the bone. It's okay. It's a bone.
It's a bone. Actually, most of your questions are our questions.
Please repeat them in your own words. That's great.
We will. because,
This one,
yeah, he'll make sure that we nail it.
nail it.
So our first one was how to make the affect/effect of the FI last, for just even if it was one session, which of course then led to how to communicate the long-term benefits of FI as a process of learning to sense. And that led to how can we teach people to sense better through an FI? How to choose what to do and build a series of FI. So I suppose this is what is the balance between FI and ATM question. So is learning more effective within an ATM or FI, which addresses that, how much talking, how much hands-on, so that balance. Oh yes, this one is how to track and monitor the student from FI to FI in that written and recording fashion. Like, what are the best ways to
record keeping.
Record it so that when you've done one or two sessions, you remember how they are, and also to remind them how they were as well. Oh, is that right? And just our recording. How do we map that recording? Yeah.
Just would like to add specifically
Yes,
to
please.
this question. Yeah. In relation to statistics, I'm not sure that we really can talk about statistics for Feldenkrais method. But still, it's really, at least now I have that question for myself. I would like to record the benefits. I would like to record what's happening with the person and what are the parameters I need to. Yes, it's like for research.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, and then of course it comes to the issue of pain. So how to refocus a person's attention away from pain. So that's one thing, which leads us to how to work with a person who is in pain. And then as a subset of that is how to work with well people to improve them so that they don't get
So they get so they get weller.
Yes. So they get weller.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
How many do you want? Do you want them all?
All. I want them all.
Okay.
I mean, the questions are really important. Questions are really important.
How to focus on what the client can do well and working with that to address what they struggle with. That's come up a lot in the summit for me, just getting people out of their stories and into places where they can do things. Did you hear the one about the guy who was treating someone who was a dentist? Who kept getting bad backs? And he'd come every week, get fixed, and then he'd come back the next week and he said, well, why don't we work on something you like? And they worked on his golf swing and his back problems went away.
That's a dentist joke. Golf.
Golf?
All dentists play golf, don't they?
Oh, yeah. Finding my ground of like what to focus on during an FI with the client. So it's something to come back to and settle into, not just jump around and try and figure stuff out all over the place, which can be nice. But, how to choose a sequence for an FI, how to set an expectation for the lesson and their outcome. So we've talked a lot about giving the client some decent expectations in relation to what they come with. How to paint a picture of the process of integration for the client. How to make ATM and FI relevant to the client, which is similar. How to show them more of themselves when they are ultra focused on one particular area or outcome. how to show them possibility for progression over time, over a series of lessons. So a lot of that's still expectation management. Having a good self-arrangement and when meeting the client physically and maintaining ground and breathing. Doing FIs in different arrangements, not just in lying down, but having them sit up or do exercises. How do you make it relatable to the client and enjoyable? How to work in positions that aren't ideal, including the client in the process in an engaging way. That's pretty much the same one. Best way to keep a client engaged enough during rests and what is enough. Recognizing when to move from a particular movement or when to rest. So yeah, if you're working with someone, you've been on something a long time, just recognize that point. All right, that's enough. Should I move on somewhere else or should I give them a rest? And how to work with really stiff bodies when it's hard to sense what's changing and knowing where to go and what to do. And last one was, yeah, creating and keeping client files. And so, fair bit. Yeah.
I recognise there's a similar question from the Sydney mob. They also asked about stiff bodies.
Oh, yeah. That was probably me.
Can I just add another one after listening to the call bit?
You write it down?
Totally support.
Yeah.
And the other thing is the head. More understanding about moving the head. I have quite a lot of reservations.
Do you want to write
about
that down,
heads.
please? Yep, that's great. Write it down. The reason I got you to write down these questions is, first of all, so we can post them up on the wall. Second of all, so that what I choose to focus on during this week can address some of those things. But most importantly, is that that these then frame your perception and what you've got your sniffer out for over the next 2 weeks. Yeah? I can share with you something that I experienced in Sydney when people were looking at the functional integration lessons. I found myself doing the FI, and I went to make a comment because no one had asked a question for about 20 minutes. And then I stopped myself. Wait a minute. No, wait a minute. It's not about me making comments. It could be, but at that stage it wasn't clear. It's like, no, it's about questions. So I said, you're not asking any questions. And then I got back, I don't know what to ask. So at least if you keep coming back to your questions, we'll post them up on the wall, and that's why on the butcher's paper. So if you could transfer those onto the big sheet of paper, that'd be great, so that you can come back and remind yourself what your questions are. And that's why I wanted to hear the repetitions, so you could hear the repetition. And that way, when it comes to watching the class FIs, you can have a reference. You can carry on. Oh yeah, that's why. Yep, whatever. But at least that way, when it comes to the table, you'll have questions to ask, and not be in that how should I say it? Cinema mode. You know, when you go to the cinema or when you go to the theatre, you get so absorbed in the show. Well, I'm not asking you to be critics, but when you go to the theatre to be do a critique of the show, you can't just be absorbed in the show. There's a part of you that needs to be kind of off to the side and doing the critique. So the same thing here. If you've got these questions, then at least you've got a reference there for yourself. And you can, okay, oh yeah, there's this question I want to ask. Oh, that's right now. How come, what's this? What would you do next? Okay, that's why the question's there. So if you had written them down on a small sheet of paper, please, sometime during today, write them up on the larger sheet and leave them on the front table there, and we'll put them up on the board, and I'll put them down onto us. We'll get them onto the outline. Now, I don't think you don't need a break, do you? Do you need a break? No, you don't need a break. No, of course you need a break. Do you want a break? Brief one. Okay, brief. A brief break. You see what's on the whiteboard there? Personal practice of ATM. That's next.